So Valerie, how do you, as time goes on, make sure that you're keeping in pace with what the risks at a given time would be? So I can see somebody saying, okay, give me an annual report from management and that's good enough, and we'll ask the same questions every single year and see where it goes from there. Is that enough, or should there be more?
There's going to have to be more in today's world. Like you mentioned, the risks are, I will say, increasing and varied. Even when you mention politics, and I know we're not supposed to mention those, the sanctions very well are going to be a material risk for different companies, depending on where you operate. The companies I'm involved with, the one I'm on the general counsel of, is global, so we have to focus on that. So they are constantly changing, so you can't do an annual report, set it aside and say, okay, these are the ones we're going to deal with. When you think about disruption and AI, cyber, now sustainability, I was at a conference yesterday on ESG, and the institutional investors are all over what you're doing on climate change. They want to know across all industries, agriculture, oil and gas, which I'm involved with, even financial services and the buildings that you own or operate. So what I would recommend, and I obviously would love y'all as outside counsel recommend, is we look at those differently every year. We not only look at the risk we focused on the prior year, but we ask our management to think about what's upcoming, to think ahead. As our strategy changes, those risks will change. And then we get that list, go through that list and say, okay, what are the most important? You know, you do your typical chart of what has the highest or lowest probability, and then if it were to occur, what would that cause damage and detriment to the company, and then decide what we're going to focus on. That still doesn't mean that you leave the others aside. You have to keep them there, but you focus on the most material ones first. There's too much for directors in today's world. Unfortunately, it's so different than it was 10 years ago. So it's a lot of work. There's more work now.
So Pat, what about in kind of more particular circumstances like an M&A transaction? So you've seen this on both sides recently, both as buyer and as seller, as CEO, as director. Risk oversight in that context, what does that look like?
While a board's duty of oversight is not management of risk, I think the depth of oversight that directors have today, it's just much deeper. And therefore you require a lot more information and a lot more engagement with management than I think was even the case 5 years ago. So that's a fact. And you know, that in and of itself can create a lot of odd dynamics with the management team as the board does its duty. I think in the context of M&A, there's probably not a more important time for a board to really exercise its risk oversight duties. I think typically, and I'm not speaking to CB&I or a Vectren specific situation, but you know, when a management team brings an acquisition, for example, to a board, there's a lot of euphoria around that acquisition, and obviously a lot of positive leaning towards we just need to get this done. And that could be for a lot of different reasons from the management's perspective. So I think it's really incumbent on a board in an M&A situation to really dig in deeply to all the same risks that they look at for their own company, on the acquiring company, any specific risks that the combined company may see. And you know, this is a situation where I think if you start to sense pushback from your management team on getting the information you feel as a director you need to provide proper oversight, you've got to stand up and push back and ask for more information. And frankly, if you don't get that additional engagement from your management team, that in and of itself, I think, is a red flag that there probably are risks there in the acquisition that are not being fully discussed and vetted and quantified. So I think that is such a critical time for directors to really dig in and do their job more than ever in the context of an acquisition. So
when you step into one of these situations, one of the things that the cases focus on are the minutes, right? Well, what are the ways that the directors and, you know, when they approve the minutes and things like that, can focus on creating a good record of their good process, right? You've done all of this work. Might as well get credit for it. How should that look?
Well, I think that was the real problem in the Bluebell case. So, you're at the motion to dismiss stage where all the court's really looking at are what documents the company provided in response to a books and records request. And so they're looking at the minutes and they're seeing no mention on the agenda or in the discussion of food safety, which is the critical issue to, a single product company like Bluebell. Now, do we really think that Bluebell and the board weren't talking about food safety? I mean, it seems unlikely that that's the case, but when you can't point to documents, to documentation that it was an agenda item, there was discussion about it, when these reports were coming in of listeria being in the plants or of FDA, inspections, finding issues, when there's no documentation that the board then followed up to make sure management was doing something about it, then that's when you have a problem. And the goal is to get these cases dismissed before they go into discovery. And so that's why you really do have to document. It doesn't have to be in detail, everything that everyone said in the meeting, but just, an indication that the board was really looking at, considering, and following up on these issues.
How do you, as a board member, how do you ask an intelligent question about a subject you're not an expert on, for example, cybersecurity? You say, well, how are you doing? And the chief technology officer says, oh, we're all set, we're fine. And then.
Well, I'll speak from my own experience. I think the amount of third parties that come in during board meetings for training on certain topics, cyber is one of them, has increased dramatically over the last few years. And it's so exact, to your point, so that directors can meaningfully first understand the risks that are being explained to them by management, but also allowing you to provide input. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But I also think that's where, I'll go back to the first comment I made about the NACD. They have a lot of great material that you can learn outside the boardroom as well to prepare you to do your job as a director.
And I totally agree. You bring people in to educate your board. And then also if you feel like you need some more work at the company level, then the board can ask to hire a consultant or someone to assist in the development of whatever programs you need.
Yeah, I would say if you ever feel as a director that you don't know what's going on or you're not comfortable with the topic, you raise your hand and you speak either with the CEO or the general counsel or the chair and say, we need to cover this and I need more help with this. Asking questions matters, right? Barbara Dugan-Aaron in ACD would say noses in, fingers out. But if you're not willing to actually engage on those topics that you don't know about, what you're really doing is you're ignoring red flags, right? You as the director are deferring or you're effectively delegating your fiduciary duty on the topic of, for example, cybersecurity to the other directors and hoping they get it right.